Good afternoon and welcome to the Santa Barbara City Council Ordinance Committee meeting of July 20th, 2021. Ms. Crisante, if you take the roll, please.
Of course. Councilmember Sneddon.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Chair Jordan.
And present.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to public comment for items that are not on today's agenda. Ms. Crisante, if you'd walk us through that, please.
Of course. For those who would like to make a public comment for items not on the agenda, please raise your hand within the app. Once you raise your hand, we can call on you. If you are speaking on items that are on the agenda, we will wait till after the presentation. Currently, we have one individual who's raised their hand, and that's Anna Marie Gott. Anna Marie Gott, please go ahead. Anna Marie Gott, you're self-muted. Anna Marie Gott, can you?
Hello.
There you go. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, council members. Approximately 3 years ago, the City Council also directed staff to work on a on-sale alcohol ordinance regarding a CUP. Today you're talking about retail, and so I'm talking about on-sale. The on-sale issues are extremely important. One of the reasons it's very important is because there is something called a licensed premise diagram, which outlines where alcohol can be served and sold. And some establishments in the city of Santa Barbara have included their parking lots and other areas that actually increase the demand for parking because they have expanded operations. That actually is something I think you really need to consider when you are looking at any type of alcohol ordinance, because that licensed premise diagram can cause substantial nuisances because people have decided that they're going to host large receptions, have outdoor bands, all sorts of things like that cause nuisances in the neighborhood, besides the issues regarding parking. And so it's extremely important that any alcohol license actually be contingent upon the license premise diagram and any permit that you decide to issue. So I think that you need to actually work on including that type of diagram in any approval that you are going to be to have, as well as revocation for any future alcohol ordinance regarding on-sale licenses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further speakers, Ms. Crisante?
Yes, our next speaker will be Jess Espinoza. Jess Espinoza, please go ahead.
Yes, I think we do need an alcohol ordinance here in town. Primarily getting rid of the cheap beers and the little small airplane bottles.
So Mr. Espinoza, if you're talking about today's ordinance, we need to just have you wait about 15 or 20 minutes till after the staff presentation, and then we'll be discussing that item.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else, Ms. Crisante?
No, Chair Jordan, no one else has their hand raised.
Okay. So we will close public comment for items that were not on the agenda and move on to our item today, which is a discussion and possible recommendation to council on off-sale alcohol regulations ordinance. Mr. Doimus, welcome aboard.
Afternoon, Councilmember Jordan, members of the committee. I'm here joined today with Captain Todd Stoney of the Santa Barbara Police Department and City Planner Renee Brook. So we're here available to answer Any questions the committee may have after the presentation? Nicole, next slide, please. So in 2017, City Council directed city staff to come forward with one of the aspects is an off-sale alcohol ordinance. Off-sale generally applies to consumption off the premises in sealed containers. So we're talking about grocery stores, gas stations, mini marts. And the purpose of the ordinance to do that is to have businesses maintain their operations in a lawful manner to prevent nuisances to spill out in the surrounding neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Now, the key issue is what authorities do cities have to prevent nuisance-like behaviors in their community? Well, the state generally has exclusive jurisdiction and preempts the city when it comes to the manufacture, sale, purchases, and transportation of alcohol, and through the California Constitution. And the main department that handles all that is the California Department of Alcohol Beverage Control. The acronym is ABC, which is very popular for that. However, cities are allowed to control some of the secondary aspects of alcohol use through its land control issues. Again, through developing performance standards to prevent nuisance activities, which we'll explain later on in the presentation today. Next slide, please. Two of the most common tools that local jurisdictions have used to handle these issues is one through the issuance of conditional use permits for new businesses that come after an ordinance is put into place, and those who've existed or grandfathered prior to the ordinance through deemed approved ordinances. We have the authority to do so under the California Business Professions Code, section 23790, which allows cities to require a CUP for new businesses. Next slide, please. Cities can also impose certain standards of operations on existing ones, but we cannot require them to obtain a CUP. However, we can exercise certain performance standards, to prevent nuisance activities like preventing littering or certain displays in windows. However, we cannot regulate what they sell. So current establishments that do sell high concentration of alcohol or airplane bottle servings, the ordinance cannot regulate or prevent them from doing so. Next slide, please. The city's deemed approved ordinances have been legally challenged in the past, so we know this ordinance is very lawful. It started the first city to enact such a law. Oops, previous slide. Thank you. The first city to enact a deemed approved ordinance was Oakland, and naturally it was the first city to face litigation. In that case, courts deemed that the city was not preempted through having a regulation or ordinance, that it did not infringe or preempt on the state's authority, that merely the ordinance was an enforcement mechanism to prevent nuisance activities. There was also a challenge a couple years ago in regards to equal protection claim when certain stores that had over 10,000 square feet and 10% of its space was dedicated to alcohol use was preempted from that. The court said cities have the ability through its police powers to look at and control such regulations, and if it deems such a large store that had such a small amount devoted to alcohol, didn't have to apply. Cities do have that local control of what this applies to and what it doesn't apply to, such an ordinance. Next slide, please. So again, what retailers are being regulated? Again, as I mentioned, it's off sales, mini markets, neighborhood markets, wine shops, service stations, and it's a type 20 and 21 license that are being regulated. Type 20 license authorizes the sale of beer, wine, and 21 also does the same and also includes distilled spirits. Currently, the city right now has 141 off-sale establishments. So all of these establishments right now would be grandfathered in if an ordinance was enacted. And there still doesn't mean that an ordinance can't require a CUP in the future, but we'll explain how that's even possible. Next slide, please. The ordinance was presented to this is a land use ordinance. It's required to go to the Planning Commission. It was presented on May 13th, and we came back and got input from the Planning Commission. We took over 20 comments and put them into the ordinance in terms of requiring sensitive uses to be at least a change in terms of the required findings. We also did a modification that sensitive uses, that these establishments won't be within 500 feet of a sensitive area, places like such as schools, churches, alcohol rehabilitation centers, drug treatment centers. Next slide, please. The Planning Commission also wanted a mandatory annual meeting to review how off-sale alcohol establishments have been operating, particularly focusing on problem ones that have had notices violation. Again, the also did a modification on the CUP required findings that the location of a new establishment won't adversely affect the crime rate in that area. I should also point out, Planning Commission received numerous comments that enforcement should be through the Community Development Department, but not the Police Department. However, such a change in terms of administrative functions now within the purview of the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. Just to clarify, we have the ordinance is kind of repeated in two forms, in Chapter 2880 and in Chapter 30. Of course, those in Chapter 28 are in regards to the coastal zone, and inland would be for Title 30. Next slide, please. So the ordinance grants all existing establishments as a deemed approved. We deem it as, we call it existing establishments in the ordinance, and their status may continue when the ordinance is in effect, provided that there's a couple things that they have to adhere to. One being that their operations are not discontinued for a period of over a year. There is a nuisance is not created during, in terms of their operating continued nuisance behavior during a period of time after giving enforcement. And next slide, please. If I could just pause for 1 second. I'm just having one little computer problem. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second on this.
John, you're not coming through verbally. I can't hear you.
I apologize for that. Sorry, it just it's a computer issues, but I think I resolved them. So what happens now if a property is declared a nuisance, even if it's an existing one? We take corrective measures. The first step is staff would go out, enforcement would go out there and meet with the business owner to try to get compliance. We're not sitting there, being draconian in terms of right away hammering with the notice of violation. Talk to them, see what the issues are. If it's complaints from neighborhoods, trying to address those. If it continues, we document it through a notice of violation and give a certain abatement time, like we would anywhere else when it comes to our administrative enforcement throughout the city. After that, there would be administrative citations to show the serious level. There'd be fines. And if the business continues not to address the nuisance behavior and does not abate the violations, a hearing before the Planning Commission can come there. Now, maybe the first hearing would be for suspension of its use or to modify. But eventually, if it's serious enough and the problems do not abate, they can revoke such a use. An appeal would go to the city council for that. And if they would want to reestablish themselves to allow to continue to sell alcohol in the future, then they would be required to get a conditional use permit. So there is one scenario where a deemed approved or existing business would be required to get a CUP. And that is if they continue to maintain violations and don't address them within a period of time and not work with city staff on dealing with it. Next slide, please. Now, new establishments, and I have Renee Brook here from the city planning, are required to obtain a CUP through our already existing process. So we didn't add to it. We follow the same mechanism we have in the municipal code, both in inland and a coastal zone. Planning Commission does have the authority to impose conditions on the approval of CUP, which we have. The two main conditions or findings that that the Planning Commission is required to make whenever a new business comes into existence is one, that it will not affect the crime rate in the area, and number two, that it won't affect the character of the neighborhood surrounding neighborhood. Planning Commission must make specific findings as well. They can make additional findings into any CUP like they normally would in the process. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the findings for the CUP that are required, that it will not adversely affect the crime rate in the area proposed, and its upkeep and operating characters are compatible with in terms of the neighborhood and will not affect the livability. So those are two required findings that are in the ordinance. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we have performance and nuisance standards for new businesses. Like I said, they cannot be located in areas with, they are permitted in areas with low to average crime rates, but high crime rates, they would not. As I mentioned, Planning Commission made a modification of having it 500 feet away from a school, residentially zoned lot, healthcare facilities, substance abuse treatment centers, religious facilities. There's a product limitation sales. We're not allowing for airplane bottles or certain high concentration type of alcohols. And we have various nuisance prevention measures in terms of littering, the type of lighting, not blocking windows of stores with alcohol advertisement, not having it within 5 feet of the entranceway of a store. So those are some of the performance standards that are contained in the ordinance. Next slide, please. This is just a kind of, I worked with Captain Stoney on this. This is just kind of a rough estimate in terms of what the cost would be for enforcing it. Now, our fee is recovery based for running the administrative program. Obviously, we can not make a profit. It's just based on what is the cost for us to run this program? And generally, it's, as always, it's going to be our employees' cost. So we looked at that. Having a full-time police officer, you see the amount there, a little bit over $163,000. Using an officer part-time to administer the program would be $70,000. And then we have a full-time code enforcement, so not necessarily a peace officer, but a code enforcement officer akin to a building inspector, zoning inspector. Those would be the price differences. Right now we have 141. We haven't really sat down to see if this program would truly require full-time or half-time work. A lot of the work too would be, not only doing inspections, but how often we'd want to do inspections. Would it be quarterly for each business? And of course, as always, a lot of the time would be spent dealing with a troubled property in terms of our resources being used for that. But at least these are the costs we anticipate in terms of who would fulfill the role and what the estimated salary would be. Next slide, please. The ordinance also contains a letter of the public necessity and training. So the letter of public necessity usually issued by the chief of police whenever an applicant is required to obtain one by the ABC. That's just to show that there is a public need for this, that, for example, what we're going to sell makes it easier for people. There isn't one near their location, so it reduces travel, the expense of travel, and there's a need around it for the area of the community. I know it sounds kind of strange why there would be such a thing, but there is a purpose behind this. If I'm selling if the only full range of alcohol being sold is 3 miles away from someone's home, but we're proposing one a mile away now, it does, according to the ABC, serve that public need and necessity by making it a shorter distance and travel for someone to go closer to the home to obtain their alcoholic beverage. Also, manager employees are required to have training. So and all their employees how to spot false IDs, how to recognize inebriated persons. So we are going to have with our enforcement officers check to make sure that they fulfill the training requirements. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, enforcement program is, I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but we would develop an enforcement program. And enforcement would look to see if stores are not complying with the CUP requirements, or those that are deemed existing are not following the performance standards or allowing nuisance behaviors to exist around their properties or on their properties. As I mentioned, we would create enforcement would be two based. One, to do just general inspections of each of the 141 off-sale establishments, but also those that we receive complaints on, or when we're doing our regular inspections, notice violations. We would again do progressive enforcement like we would normally do. And we'd start off with a conversation. We follow it with a notice of violation, documenting the violations, giving the owner of the business a chance to abate those violations, and then so on. The next step would be fines, as I mentioned. And finally, again, if at the last, the last step, the last measure, we would have to take, the ordinance must have teeth in it in order to be successful, is if you have someone who's not willing to comply, there could be a suspension or revocation. It would initially be heard by the Planning Commission, then again, the right to appeal to City Council, and then it would be a writ to Superior Court after that. Next slide, please. I think that's the last one for yes. And so Captain Stoney, myself, and Renee Brooke are available for any questions. And again, I apologize for the brief interruption on the technical difficulty.
No worries. Thank you very much. I'm going to actually just break from the process really quick. There's a young lady on at the meeting that has a time certain appointment, and she needs to bail out in a couple minutes, and she was nice enough to ask. So, Ms. Crescenti, would you see if Dawn Dunn is available quickly to share her public comment before she has to go?
Yes, of course. Dawn Dunn?
I'm here.
Wonderful.
I think you can go ahead, Dawn.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate the special consideration. My name is Dawn Dunn. I did submit a letter to you. I'm a long-term Santa Barbara resident, 40 plus years. I'm a homeowner in Councilmember Sneddon's district. I worked for the Public Health Department's tobacco prevention program for 30 years. And in my tenure in that position, I was involved in about 50 public policy hearings. Most of you have seen the change in social norms surrounding tobacco use. I coordinated with your city business license department, your city administrator's office, your community policing department and ambassadors, your businesses, and your police department over the many years. I can't specifically go through my entire letter. Suffice to say that local control is the secret to good governance on public nuisance and this type of issue. I strongly support the DAO and actually deemed approved ordinance, and actually don't think it goes far enough. I would absolutely like to see you remove mini bottles from the counters, not from the stores. They are a high theft, low price item. They're what we would call a starter product for young people and people of low income. We took tobacco off the counter in 2000 and 2001 in your city, in the county, in Carpinteria. They didn't do it until like 2010 at the state level. And they said that people were going to get shot in the head, and it didn't happen. We want to be fair to our businesses, but we need to protect our retail businesses. We need to protect other businesses, families, youth. And your sit and stay ordinance would be improved if this kind of thing goes through. Local control is the best way. We worked on the secondhand smoke ordinance with community enforcement. It's worked very, very well. And I urge you to take action that is meaningful and has consequences. And I like the warning system. People can, take care of their own businesses and improve the surrounding areas. I think that's responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. And then we will return to our regular program in the order, and questions from council members. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. I just have questions about those mini bottles, or about the size of bottles, and if you could give us some more detail in this ordinance, or what could be considered within this about either removing them from the counters or having them not be quite so inviting, or the size of beer cans. This is something we've received public comment, and we're probably going to have public comment on today, but if you could just speak to that in particular, the size of the bottles.
Absolutely, Councilmember Senate. I want to split up in two things. Number one, those that are existing or those in the future, we can put performance standards where they can be placed, or the advertisement. However, those that are existing, we can, if they already sell, for example, airplane bottles or certain things, we can't regulate that. They're allowed. The ordinance is not allowed. We're preempted from the California Business and Professions Code. However, new ones, we can. So what the ordinance does specifically, it says here that wine must be in container with volume of 750 milliliters or greater in size, except multi-pack containers of wine. Multi-pack wine and wine coolers should not be sold in containers smaller than 12 ounces, and in units less than 1 4-pack for off-site consumption. And distilled spirits, which a lot of people focus on, except pre-mixed cocktails, must be in a container with a volume of 375 milliliters or greater in size. Miniature, single-serving, travel-size airplane bottles are prohibited, and distilled spirits shall not be permitted in a 375 milliliter hip flask containers. So that's what the ordinance has. It also talks about beer, ale, malt liquor must be in containers in volume greater than 32 ounces. And multi-pack beer, ale, and malt liquor containers of 32 ounces or less shall be sold in units less than 1 3-pack for off-site consumption. So what it does is it takes high concentration or hard liquor and does not have it miniature in size to be used, or like beer, for example, to be served in a single serving pack. So that's what the ordinance contains for those coming into effect after the ordinance. But those that are deemed existing, we cannot apply it to those businesses.
Thank you. And so that would also apply to single cans of pre-mixed margarita or any. It
wouldn't apply to a pre-mixed can of margarita. It does have an exception for that. So a pre-mixed cocktail type can, it wouldn't apply to that. That's what we have, at least in the ordinance. Now,
so it's the mini bottles and beer and malt liquor cans specifically.
Correct.
And is the idea to prevent theft, or is it to not be as attractive to minors, or sort of help me with why the distinction of size for some and not others, and some types of liquor and not others?
Number one, for theft is one, correct? I think you addressed them all. Theft, one, attractiveness, and also, frankly, in terms of to prevent total inebriation, in terms of high concentration, cheap liquor. Get it in a little, get an airplane bottle are generally cheap. You can get 2 or 3 of them, high concentration or really high concentration alcohol to cause inebriation fast and cheaply. And so that's the purpose. But again, to clarify, even those that are existing, we can regulate the placement of where they are within the store. Just can't prevent them from selling it.
So we can have them off the counter.
Correct.
And not so easily accessible. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Mr. Drimus, I have a couple of questions for you. So when you were showing that slide on the 4 enforcement people, you're not suggesting that you need all 4 of those. You're suggesting it's some combination of that yet to be determined.
Councilmember Jordan, actually just one, one person.
Okay, right.
But we just showed the range of if we needed a full-time police officer to do it.
And if we're drawing a nexus between participation in the permit process and a charge for that, and the expense we're going to incur, how do we effectively fence off that revenue and that position so that it doesn't get misdirected when other positions are missing and an enforcement officer gets called to go a different direction, or a police officer gets called to go a different direction? How have other communities handled that?
I will ask Captain Stoney to come on and help answer that question. He's worked, he's been very helpful in terms of that issue. I do want to add one thing though, that as I mentioned earlier, this is a cost recovery, so it has to be strictly for our costs. So if, for example, we're using, let's say, a position where the salary is 100,000 plus administrative tasks, 100, we budget it that way, it would be evenly distributed in terms of the fee for all the off-sale establishments. But to ensure that it doesn't, the money, that the revenue that's generated from the fee doesn't spill over, I give you Captain Stoney on that.
Hi, Captain Stoney.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Jordan. The two cities that I've spoken with locally, Oxnard and Ventura, who do have a deemed approved, they do it both on and off sales. So it's very easy for them. They put an officer out, they do bar checks, and they spend the evening doing that. If we were going to do it on an overtime basis, what we generally do with like anything else in the city is if we have to pull the officer away from the overtime assignment, we would then start paying out of a different fund. So we would be able to, we track the funds, we have a code in our pay scales that basically said this is what the time's used for. We do a lot of grants that way where we'll bring an officer in, but if there is a major event that happens in this city, we'll able to pull them off and then we'll reassign them later to fulfill the grant.
So you've looked at other cities too. Then what, do you have an opinion you'd want to share on a home for this enforcement person and why?
We've had a number of discussions. I could see if it was both on and off sale, you would absolutely have to have it come out of the police department because we would be going out on, for example, Friday and Saturday nights, going into bars, doing bar checks for the on sale. With the off sale, I could see it work both ways. The one thing I would make sure that the community understands that if it was a law enforcement officer, we do deal with stuff like that, and it's not. I know there's a concern that it'll be either heavy-handed but do you need an officer in a uniform to do some of the off-sale stuff they're suggesting? I could see it be done by a code enforcement officer very successfully.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. I have a couple more questions for Mr. Doimus. So there was a phrase in there when you were working us through how somebody with a deemed approved would migrate to having to be in a CUP, be put in the CUP process. And the phrase used was called create nuisance conditions, which my working English definition of create is brand new. But what we're really talking about, nuisance conditions, are historical ones that already exist also, right? So I'm just, without trying to split hairs, I'm just wondering if that word create is really accurate, or if we're not just, or are we acknowledging that what we're really trying to do is we're trying to tamp down on the existing nuisance conditions out there. It's not that you created a new one, it's just you're continuing the same nuisance conditions you already had. And if that would be part of the pathway to being suspended, revoked, and moving to a CUP. Does all that make sense?
No, Councilmember Jordan, it does. I think it could be a mixture of both. It could be already ones that are out there. Obviously, a store owner could create them by, serving to minors, serving inebriated people, not, allowing people to drink in its parking lot and just trash or litter and not dealing with that. So in that sense, I do think it's a creation on their part. But again, there are some conditions that are already existing too that this ordinance is designed to give local control to address those issues.
Then when you have a current location that's approved in business right now, and there's a sale of the business and a sale of whatever licenses there are, does that still retain the same deemed approved status in our ordinance?
So if there's a sale, so a person, when there's a license transfer through the ABC, there is a notification to the city council, the police department, everything else, they are going to be sold. So and there's a transfer of a license. So that's a new person that goes through a new background. And so that can be a change in condition. If we have a concern about this owner, for example, let's say, I'll give an example. Let's say we have an owner that has improperly managed 2 stores in town and now and lost, for example, their CUP, we would want to prevent them from doing that. So that's a different change in the mode of operation and a change in character. So it could be several things that would require a new status, right? It could be a change in ownership, change in terms of increasing their display. Maybe before it was 20% of their floor space dedicated to display of alcohol. New owner comes in, wants 70% of it to display, you know. So there could be a change in the character or mode, which encompasses all that, yes, potentially they could lose their deemed approved status.
Okay. And then they would, as part of that transfer, then they would have to go through a CUP process.
Correct.
Where we then would appropriately just address all of those considerations, right?
Correct.
Okay. Then I didn't read the whole ordinance. I'll just admit that up front. Last page of the staff report at the top, when you talk about the completion of the responsible beverage service, what it says in there is all store managers and employees. I would imagine there's a bunch of little places around town. Well, I know there's one down on 400 block of State Street where the owners are the only people in the store. They're no quote unquote managers and there are no store employees, it's just owners. Does the ordinance pick up those type of operations too, to where the owners are required to complete that also?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Councilmember Jordan. Yes, you know, I view them as managers too. Yeah, they may own the store, but they're also managing it, especially if they're the only person there. So it would pick them up as they're being required. It was a consideration we thought of, and to me, they're managers for sure, even if they own it.
It's good for me then. Thank you. Thank you so much. If there's no more questions, we will go to public comment on this item. And I don't see anybody coming on the screen. So Ms. Crisante, Mr. Gutierrez.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just logging on.
Winding up for public comment?
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Crisante, if you'd lead us through public comment again for this, please.
Sure. We have a few speakers that have raised their hands. The first individual will be Daniel Gonzalez. Daniel Gonzalez, please go ahead. Daniel Gonzalez, you're self-muted. Chair Jordan, we'll go to the next speaker, which is Lay Tech. Lay Tech, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. How's everyone doing? Good afternoon. My name is Lay, and I wanted to voice my strong support for the OffSale Alcohol Conditional Use Permit Ordinance in Santa Barbara. As someone who works directly with the youth in Santa Barbara, I'm stunned by the stories they recount in regards to alcoholic consumption in the city. It's not uncommon to hear about how their neighborhoods have become food deserts because grandfathered liquor stores have slowly converted their stores from convenience stores to full-blown BevMos. The number of on-sale liquor licenses are 3 times more than the original recommended limit, and there are twice as many for off-sale licenses. This oversaturation of liquor stores have led to a normalization of drinking in Santa Barbara. Studies show that crime is more prevalent in areas near liquor stores because of the nuisance behaviors these locations attract. In fact, 5% of all police calls are to this class of business. This has cost the city $860,000 annually, or $4.2 million in the last 5 years. The OffSale Alcohol Conditional Use Permit Ordinance will provide a way for regulations to be implemented and enforced to ensure that liquor stores are all held to the same standards and how they market and advertise alcohol, the shelf space of their stores dedicated to alcohol, public nuisance prevention, and ensuring stores are in compliance. This goes a long way towards eliminating food deserts, fostering an environment for a diversity of businesses to crop up, and focusing on the public health of our community. One thing I strongly support is having the alcohol ordinance to be enforced by the Department of Code Enforcement or housed under the Development Department. Inspecting a business for compliance does not require additional law enforcement. This can be done by a different city agency or position. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Natalia Gonzalez. Natalia Gonzalez. Let's get the timer restarted. Please go ahead.
Many members. While I do appreciate all the work and effort Assistant City Attorney John Doimus has exerted for this revised draft, it still needs improvement in the following areas. First of all, under the required findings section 2880.070, the term significantly has got to be clearly defined, because as it sits now, it is very subjective. And as a business owner, all these acts listed in this paragraph are significant. Next, in the section public nuisance 2880.300, it states repeated within the premises or in close proximity of the premises. That statement also needs to be clearly defined because it is very loose here. Furthermore, in section B of the required findings section 2880.070, surrounding neighborhood and abutting properties need to also be very clearly defined. For instance, the building where my boutique is located abuts right up against Pat's Liquor Store, and their patrons still use our driveway, property, and flower beds to sit, drink, and dispose of their alcohol bottles and trash. Finally, I would recommend that this committee consider implementing a complaint response community relations program where the police or community directors monitor community complaints and meet with neighbors and the business community on a regular basis to resolve complaints and issues. The city of El Cajon implemented this for their, for their alcohol ordinance, and they've been very, very successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker will be Adriana Sanchez. Let me restart the clock. Adriana Sanchez, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, City Council members. My name is Adriana Sanchez, and I am the Santa Barbara Youth Organizer with Future Leaders of America here in Santa Barbara. I strongly support the alcohol ordinance. I did submit a written comment that I hope that you will get the time to read. But I support this regulation because it would ban many bottles and reduce the amount of alcohol ads in our communities. This will be effective in decreasing underage drinking, and the reduction of ads will stop the normalization of drinking to our children. While I support the alcohol ordinance, most specifically, I would like to request that there be a code enforcement or development department to enforce this ordinance and not the police. The city can support this program through another department, and as noted earlier in the presentation, it's significantly cheaper than having a full-time overtime officer. I'm adamant that the police department not be involved in the enforcement of this policy because over-policing puts the lives of our community members in danger, most specifically our low-income communities and people of color. We cannot solve a public health problem with another public health problem, which is the police. Please consider a community model of enforcement. I'm asking that the Ordinance Committee join us in supporting the alcohol ordinance to promote a healthy, prosperous community. And with this, I hope that you take action to protect our young people and families from the consequences of the normalization of alcohol consumption in Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Anna Marie Gott. Anna Marie Gott, please go ahead. Anna Marie Gott, you're self-muted.
Good afternoon, council members. I actually don't support having, our code enforcement only being the people that are going to be moderating this. I do believe that our police must be involved because they have much stronger, processes that they have to follow compared to our code enforcement officers. Regarding licensed premise diagrams, which I recently spoke about for retail, for non-retail, I also believe that we need to require this for retail establishments. this can actually help define the square footage and the exact placement of where we want to have alcohol advertised. It could prevent in the future alcohol bottles at the check stand. In regards to revocation, I do believe that we need much stronger issues that would be related to revocation. Why? Because the simple threat of revocation can change behavior. If fees are not paid, that should be a cause for revocation. If the establishment has completed building without permit, that should be cause for revocation. Also, other causes might be the sale of alcohol or tobacco to minors. If there are numerous public nuisance issues that include noise, loitering, or other issues the city considers public nuisances. If the expansion of a percentage of the licensed premise diagram is not approved under the zoning, then that should also be cause. I think more work needs to be done, and we need much stronger causes for revocation because that will actually increase compliance. And I'd just like to remind you that the Planning Commission has discretion to actually revoke a license, and strong actions regarding revocation and issues will actually prevent revocations, increase compliance, and really help, I believe, our community. The last point,
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Your
outreach.
time's up. Thanks. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Christelle Barros. Christelle Barros, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, City Council members. Thank you for all your efforts and everything you do. Very grateful for each of you. I wanted just to briefly speak to the fact that I do support this ordinance. In addition, I would like to say that I support the suggestion on the part of Natalia Gonzalez about the creation of an outreach for complaint response team so that an engagement process can happen between the community, can happen and grow the relationship between the community and the enforcers of this ordinance. So that's it. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Ms. Crescente?
Daniel Gonzalez, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, Ordinance Committee members. My name is Adriana Gonzalez. I'm the Organizing Director with Future Leaders of America. I'm here to encourage you to support the OffSale Alcohol Conditional Use Permit Ordinance. The number of on-sale liquor licenses are 3 times more than the original recommended limit set by the city, and there are twice as many off-sale liquor licenses. Currently, there's not enough regulation around alcohol sales in the city of Santa Barbara, and due to the lack of regulation, underage drinking and excessive drinking is becoming a public health crisis. Our communities need more to support to deter underage drinking and excessive drinking. Youth are also being more predominantly targeted with advertisement and content from these liquor stores at every corner. How can we promote a self-conscious lifestyle for our youth while at the same time exposing youth to alcohol advertisement? The truth of the matter is that the more advertisements youth see, the more they are likely to drink. It is up to us to ensure that we have more rules and regulations in place to address these concerns. The alcohol ordinance will definitely help to address many of these health disparities associated with the sale of alcohol. It will also ensure that we have regulations in place to curb the sale of alcohol in our communities by modeling a community that values youth and their community over profit. Lastly, I want to add that at the moment, the alcohol ordinance is currently written to be enforced by the police department, which I think would lead to more criminalizations of our community, which is something that we need to stop. I urge you to seek a more community enforcement model that would eliminate the need of the police and give the community a bigger role and responsibility. As you saw in the presentation before, right now, I believe they would hire a police officer for around $160,000 $1,000, which is far more than the actual code enforcement who's doing the actual real work. So please focus more, or give the money to those that are actually going to use or make sure that our communities are safe, or our youth are not being exposed to alcohol. So please add that funding to a code enforcement and a community-based model. We need to really put our funding where it's needed, rather than in the police department who already has a huge budget. So I urge you all to take a stand today and ensure that this alcohol ordinance is passed to improve the overall health of our communities.
Thank you. Any further speakers, Ms. Crisante?
Yes, our final speaker will be Jess Espinoza. Jess Espinoza, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Council. I do think that we need.
Lost you there, Mr. Espinoza, if you can hear us.
I see a lot of underage drinking over here at the Cacique Bridge. And I think it would extremely help the sit and lie ordinance, where these homeless individuals wouldn't be able to access such cheap alcohol and they wouldn't be passed out everywhere. So I appreciate that all your hard work, and we can get something done.
Thank you. Is that it, Ms. Crisante?
That is it, Chair Jordan. No further speakers on this item.
We will close public comment and bring it back to the committee for discussion. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. I had a couple questions in response to public comment there. One is about the code enforcement or community development department as being the enforcement agency rather than law enforcement, or whether there could be incremental steps to that, or how would that be part of the ordinance, how the enforcement is, or would that be a separate decision outside of that?
Councilmember Sneddon, that we would receive obviously input from the ordinance committee. Right now it would be the police department. I think one of the most important things to state is that anything dealing with this ordinance is not criminal in nature. There isn't going to be a criminal citation issued. It's not going to deal with customers or people in the stores. It's strictly dealing with the city and the store owners to prevent nuisance. And it's done through administrative process of a notice of violation, administrative citations, and then a revocation, which is ultimately decided by the Planning Commission and City Council through appeal. But again, we're right now, a lot of cities have put this in their police department. So obviously that's where the ordinance is geared to, but we adhere to what the ordinance committee has to say or direct us to do on that issue.
Would you have any input on that, on whether the way that our city is organized, that it would be more effective, less effective, or possibly, and any recommendations on which division it would be housed under?
I think Captain Stoney probably is more an expert on that issue because he's been dealing with other cities. So Captain Stoney can answer that question.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Sneddon. Speaking with the other cities, like I stated earlier, they're doing it as both on and off sale. So it absolutely requires a police department. From the very beginning with council, we assisted in writing the ordinance and working with the city attorney. So that's been our involvement up to this point. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm discussing this. Could it be done outside the police department? Absolutely. But we, and Mr. Dormis can talk to a little bit more, but we haven't really gotten to that point in terms of where it is. We looked at what the different funding would be. Obviously, it costs more for a full-time police officer than it would be for a part-time or even a code enforcement officer. But I can see it be effective based on just the off-sale doing it with code enforcement, but I don't really, in terms of telling you one would be better than the other, I'm not in a position to say that, but it's definitely more important.
Thank you. And is there anything in this ordinance that would prevent us from talking at a later time about the enforcement? It's not inherent in the ordinance who's enforcing, or is it?
No, it's not. It's through the city administrator, so we can talk at a later time. And the only thing I'd add from what Captain Sony says, if there ever is a policy decision to go on sale in the future, at least if you have enforcement already developed through off sales and through the police department, there isn't much of, it's easier to transition and to be able to do that in the future.
Okay, so I would just make that a comment that we could look at that for efficiencies or for, you know, relieving full-time officers from needing to do this type of enforcement if it isn't in the best use of your time, or however through the administrator's office that would be looked at. But I just want to make sure it isn't written into the ordinance at this point how it's enforced, that's a separate issue that I could see either way, and I don't think it's our purview here to decide that at this point. So I think, okay, thank you. And then I guess you said the consideration of revocation, that would be with planning commission. So there's nothing in this ordinance that lays out what might be possible cause for revocation, but does it limit revocation?
Councilmember Sutton, it lies within it. So it would be nuisance activities. So all the things we're talking about in terms of littering, serving to people who are clearly inebriated, to minors, there's a whole host of things within the ordinance in terms of general nuisance activities and specific performance standards contained in the ordinance that if these were continuously violated and not abated, we could bring those. But it should be related to the service of alcohol in terms of that as well. So that's what the ordinance contains. And then I know some of the other issue addressed in public comment about looking at diagrams or floor plans. I should clarify, when someone submits an application to the ABC, there are many different applications that are submitted, including diagrams of their floor plans, etc. So substantial modifications do include changes to the original ABC license, and the police department gets that. So if we see a new owner, we see a new or changes to those plans that were originally submitted to the ABC, that's something we could look at. Okay, before you had 30% in this diagram of floor space to take alcohol service, or now it's 80%, or so those are things the ordinance contains that allows us to look at to see if there's a substantial change or modification to the original use that was approved. So the ordinance does contain that.
Thank you. And thank you for your work on all this and thoroughness. And I would say I support this moving forward, and that answers my questions about flexibility in terms of enforcement later, see how if there needs to be an adjustment to that or not. And then also with the issues of revocation, this actually sounds fairly flexible, that if there are sort of abuses of nuisance behaviors, and then we could look at revocation. So yeah.
No, and that's part of it. You want to empower these boards like Planning Commission when it talks about significantly impact, words like that. It's up to their discretion. That's what we rely upon them for, to see the negative impact there and allow them to have the discretion to make a thoughtful decision on revocation.
I'm in favor of that. So I'm supporting the ordinance as written moving forward. Thank you.
Further comments or questions? Okay, I'll toss mine in, Mr. Demoy. If you'd come back, I just want to bounce some stuff off you. So my experience, of course, there was a significant comment on, which I actually had down on my notes and I didn't ask before because I just worked through it myself, but the use of the word significantly, close proximity, surrounding, neighbor, blah, blah, blah. So my prior experience is that the more you try to tighten up the wording, we err on the side of less results. But the more flexible you keep the wording, gives us the opportunity to adapt and be responsive to everything that neither us nor the stakeholders nor the public thought about. Is that kind of why you've used some vague words on that, like the significantly word, in order to make sure that we have the opportunity to not, as somebody commented, make it all black and white and then listen to complaints about stuff that's outside the black and white, right? Because nobody knew what the black and white would grow to. Is all that kind of the reasoning behind that?
Correct, Councilmember Jordan. I couldn't say it better. You're 100%
Oh,
correct.
I don't know that I said it all that well, but like old planning commission stuff. But so I did not give much credibility to that discussion there. I would like to see the most legal flexibility that we can have, because as soon as we put something in place, people figure out a way to get around it. And if it's tightly defined, then we're hosed, so to speak. We got to fix the ordinance, and we don't like to fix ordinances necessarily. And then on the police department versus code enforcement home, I'm pretty torn there, but I would want not to adopt this eventually when it gets to council without knowing the answer to that question. I like the idea of the police doing it, because I think that's where the data is for the nuisances, the specific data. But I like the code enforcement side, because the path of what to do once you have that data is all through community development home, planning commission, and the legal team. It's not a process, as you said, you're not going to go arrest somebody or find them or something. And so I'd really like to hear more about that when this comes back eventually, after you've taken everything everybody says and go back and play. Because I don't think I know the questions to ask to get the answers that I don't know. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Sure, Councilmember Jordan, too, and if I may add, you're right about the data. So, for example, on crime statistics, that's where the police department have immediate access to that. And automatically through the ABC notification of transfers of license or applications, they go to the police department too. So they do have that data.
And I just know it's difficult for departments or functions outside of the police department to go get police department stuff, as it should be, because it's protected. But so it just concerns me, everybody on the bandwagon, to not put it in the police department. But I don't want to tie our hands on using the data with the right people at the right time. So, but I want to hear more about that. And then I like the idea to be built into this to put standards for both the current and the new ones that would come on high content, low price, small size airline bottles. That would be the poster child, not being on the counter, not being a whatever you call those purchases that you make on a whim, that kind of thing, and not being pushed, so to speak, right in front of that type of customer that's coming in. And I'd be interested in hearing, when this comes back too, I'd be interested in hearing opinions on whether there's other grab bag stuff like that that we could address too. I would think probably the ones that we're really talking about are not the stores I go in routinely, so I don't really know. I mean, I guess I could make an effort to go in them, but if there's other like items like that that are problematic and are purposely put on the counter to be attractive and carry the biggest nuisance impact as a result, that why don't we get those off the counter too and get them behind the counter, out of reach of the customer, a little tougher to find behind the counter.
May I ask a question of the ordinance committee? Because currently, as the ordinance is written, there's performance and develop standards that relate to just the new ones. So it does talk about containers and drive-through facilities, but then it goes on, and I'll give where that section is. For example, in Title 28 is 28.80060 is performance and development standards. And so A deals with location, B deals with distance, C deals with containers, and D deals with drive-through facilities. those are ones we can impose on new ones after the existence of the ordinance. However, we can't require those upon existing ones. I already mentioned how we can't limit what they sell. However, there are, after that section, we talk about product display, lighting, noise, litter, payphone, signage, window obstruction. So I can put those specific ones and require those performance standards of existing as well. So I can create a section titled 288006.5, and those that we're allowed to do on existing, I can bring back and make that change.
So you have my support for that, and I'll let Ms. Sneddon share her comments too. But and it's not, and literally, I don't know the right question to ask. I don't know if it's just airplane bottles that we're talking about, or if there's other things strewn about on these counters also that are inexpensive, high impact in terms of the nuisance they present, and we legally could require them to get off the counter and behind the counter to where somebody would have to know to ask for them rather than see them right there. So I'm in support of that.
Okay.
I would also be in support of that, and I think I did not realize we could impose that for existing, and I think we should have that for existing businesses as well. And we're already halfway there with a lot of the screening that's been put up in liquor stores, and those bottles have already been moved out of easy reach if there's plexiglass screening there. So it doesn't seem like a stretch to me to just move those off the counter and have them not be so inviting. And I agree with Chair Jordan about if there are other items that aren't specifically named here that might contribute to nuisance behavior, be inviting in that way, that they also be moved, particularly away from placement right next to candy bars. That's very common. Thank you.
Councilmember Sneddon, Chair Jordan, I'll make those changes. So when it goes to council, they'll be contained in the ordinance.
Thanks. And then my last comment was in response to the comment about like a complaint line or a complaint group set up. And I guess I don't think today's the day. I think this would be homework for you. Maybe think about what that looks like and comes back. To me, it could simply go on the city webpage that has all those categories where you can just talk about a homeless encampment, talk about mattresses on your street, whatever that is, a new category there. And then there is that once a year hearing in front of the Planning Commission. But maybe it's as simple as make it a web, include it on our website, but maybe the first couple years, maybe have twice a year hearings. I'm hesitant to suggest to anybody the time and money to actually set up another mini bureaucracy within the bureaucracy to address this, but I would be looking for suggestions on how to respond to that's worked successfully in other cities. And maybe for a startup period, we need to front load that ability to engage and complain or report. And as presumably things get better in terms of the nuisances, and that would it would not be as stringent as it is at the start. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, Chair Jordan. We could, if we want to increase the yearly review of Planning Commission, codify that in the ordinance. But in regards to, we would plan on, and it doesn't need to be in the ordinance, but we would plan on having a complaint hotline, our own webpage, having our code enforcement meet out with the community to see what issues are there, even mediate issues. So that would be all stuff we can do as part of our enforcement program, which wouldn't have to be codified. We would just have our regulations and procedures within.
So I would suggest part of that at when the next round you go through this, that's part of the discussion or the presentation on what you think that would look like too.
Okay.
That's it for me. Anybody else think of anything else they want to offer or comment on? And Mr. Doimus, is that plenty? Oh, Ms. Sneddon.
Do you need a motion to move forward those changes, or?
I think it's just an item for response and direction So, Mr. Doimus, do we need to codify it in a motion, or have you just taken notes and you'll continue to work on this?
I'm aware. I mean, to approve it, we could just say the one major thing I'll do is codify to know is develop the performance standards to apply to the existing as well. So that'd be the only motion I would need to make sure, because that's the major change that I would be doing.
Ms. Sneddon, would you take a shot at that?
Sure, I would like to move forward the ordinance with the added section that applies those
Performance standards.
Thank you, to current operations as well.
Okay, and I'll second that to move it along. And then, Ms. Crisante, could we take a roll call vote on that?
Yes, of course. We'll do Councilmember Sneddon first.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez
Aye.
and Chair Jordan.
Yes. So, Mr. Doimus, have we given you enough to work on, or no further items that you think you need right now?
No, I have clarity and enough, and I can amend and present to council with these
Super.
changes.
Thank you so
very
much.
Thank you.
And then thank you to all the rest of staff too. And then we will be adjourned and see you shortly at 2 o'clock for council meeting. Thanks.